Your phone dies while you're waiting in line. No music, no scrolling, nothing to read. Within about 30 seconds, something starts happening in your head, a kind of low-level itch, like your brain is looking for a door and every room is locked. That feeling is boredom, and it's so old it predates the words we use to describe it. Most people treat it like a glitch, something to fix, skip past, or medicate with a notification. But boredom isn't a malfunction. It's the reason you can think creatively at all, the reason humans have language, art, music, and religion. We're going back 100,000 years to trace exactly what boredom built, and why killing it might be one of the stranger things our generation is doing to itself. Before we get there, there's an assumption worth taking apart. The common picture of early human life is relentless. Up before dawn, hunting until your legs give out, foraging between kills, building shelter before dark, starting over. Every hour accounted for. No room for anything as soft as boredom. That picture is wrong. In 1966, anthropologist Marshall Salins published a study of the Kungsan people of the Kalahari Desert, a group still living in a way that tracked closely with how humans spent most of their evolutionary history. What he found didn't match the exhausted survivor model at all. The Kungsan worked, on average, somewhere between 15 and 20 hours a week. That's not per day. That's the whole week. The rest of the time they sat around, they talked, they rested. Salins called them the original affluent society. And the affluence he meant wasn't material, it was time. They had more unstructured hours in a week than most people working modern office jobs ever get. So the premise that our ancestors were too busy to be bored collapses pretty quickly when you look at the actual evidence. They had long afternoons. They had slow evenings by fires. They had stretches of nothing in particular over and over for hundreds of thousands of years. Now that time had to go somewhere. Brains don't just sit idle. When the brain has no external task pulling its attention, it turns inward, and something starts happening in that quiet. A pressure builds. Not distress exactly, more like restlessness looking for an outlet. The brain starts generating its own problems to solve, its own patterns to find, its own questions to ask. That pressure is boredom doing its actual job. The Kungsan weren't an exception to human history. In Salin's framing, they were the original template, the baseline our biology was shaped around. And that baseline included enormous amounts of idle time, with nothing filling it but whatever the mind decided to make. What the mind decided to make, it turns out, was everything. Start with a cave in South Africa, 75,000 years ago. Archaeologists working a site called Blombos Cave pulled out a collection of small shells, the kind you'd find along a coastline. But these weren't just shells. Each one had a hole drilled clean through it, and each one was coated in red ochre, a pigment that takes deliberate effort to apply. They weren't tools, they weren't food, they were beads. Someone had sat down, picked up a stone, and spent hours, maybe days, turning a pile of shells into jewelry. That's the oldest known art object in human history, and it didn't come from necessity. Nobody needed a bead necklace to survive. It came from someone with a long afternoon and nothing else pulling at them. Drilling through a shell with a stone tool, by hand, without any of the materials we'd consider basic, is not a quick task. The alternative was staring at rock, so they made something instead. Necessity didn't invent art. Boredom did. The same pattern shows up about 35,000 years later in a cave in southern Germany. Researchers found a flute carved from the hollow bone of a vulture, 5 finger holes, deliberately spaced. It was 40,000 years old, made before agriculture existed, before any permanent settlement, before anything we'd recognize as civilization. Someone figured out that blowing air across a bone at a certain angle made a sound, and then spent time refining that into something you could actually play. Music didn't arrive because it was practical. It arrived because someone had a free afternoon and a bird bone and a brain that refused to stay quiet. Neuroscientist Daniel Levitin, who studies how music is processed in the brain, argues that our capacity for rhythm and melody is actually older than language. The brain was wired for pattern recognition before it developed complex speech, because spotting patterns in sound, in movement, in the environment was a survival tool. Boredom didn't create that wiring, but it activated it, gave it space to turn inward and start producing patterns for their own sake, rather than as a response to something in the world. But there's something underneath both the beads and the flute that matters more than the objects themselves. To be bored, you need a concept of time, not just awareness of the present moment, but a sense that this moment is stretching too long, that other moments exist beyond it, that the future is a real place you could be moving toward. Boredom requires you to hold the present and a hypothetical future in your head at the same time and feel the gap between them. That's not a simple trick. Most animals can't do it. A dog waiting by a door isn't bored, it's waiting. It has no picture of what else could be happening right now, no imagined alternative pulling against the present. A human staring into a fire 100,000 years ago had that. And once you can feel the gap between what is and what could be, your mind doesn't stay still. It starts filling the space with questions. What's past that ridge? What happens to a person after they stop breathing? Why does the sky change color before a storm? What made that sound in the dark? Every question religion has ever tried to answer, every hypothesis science is still working through, every philosophical argument about consciousness or purpose or death, all of it traces back to minds that had enough unstructured time to sit with those questions. Not because they went looking for them, but because boredom pushed them there. Psychologist Sandy Mann confirmed the mechanism in 2013. She had participants copy numbers out of a phone book, one of the more aggressively dull tasks you could assign, and then immediately tested their creative output. The board group outperformed everyone else by a wide margin. When the brain is starved of external input, it doesn't go dormant, it starts generating its own. And what it generates, given enough quiet, turns out to be genuinely original. The beads, the flute, the first question about death. They're not separate inventions. They're the same brain doing the same thing, just with different materials. Art and music are visible. You can hold a bead, you can play a flute. But the biggest thing boredom built left no physical object behind. It built the way humans relate to each other. Robin Dunbar spent years tracking what people actually talk about when they're not talking about anything urgent. His finding, roughly 65% of all human conversation is social gossip. Who did what someone said, what happened to a person neither of you has seen in weeks. Not logistics, not survival strategy, just people talking about other people. And honestly, if you've ever sat around a fire with friends and spent an hour talking about someone who wasn't there, you've been doing the exact same thing humans have done for 100,000 years. We didn't invent gossip, we inherited it. That sounds like a waste of time. Dunbar argues it's the opposite. Before language existed, primates bonded through physical grooming. One animal picking through another's fur, clearing parasites, making contact. It works, but it's slow, and it's one-to-one. You can only groom a single animal at a time, which puts a hard ceiling on how large a social group can stay cohesive. You simply can't maintain close bonds with more individuals than your hands can reach. Language broke that ceiling. Once you could talk, you could bond with 10 people at once, sitting around the same fire. You could tell a story about someone who wasn't even present, and build trust around a shared understanding of that person. You could maintain relationships with people you hadn't physically touched in months. The social group that language made possible was orders of magnitude larger than anything grooming could sustain. Dunbar's argument is that language didn't evolve primarily to coordinate hunts or pass on technical knowledge. It evolved because people were sitting around with nothing to do, and they started talking about each other. Boredom created the conditions. Long, idle evenings, unstructured time, no immediate task demanding attention, and gossip filled them. Then gossip became the glue that held groups together. And those groups, bound by shared stories and social knowledge, became the foundation everything else was built on. Boredom invented gossip. Gossip invented society. So that's what boredom built across 300,000 years of human history. Now consider what happens when you take it away entirely. Modern psychology has a name for the state of having every moment filled with external stimulation, cognitive overload. The brain never gets a gap. Every quiet second gets plugged. A notification, a video, a podcast, something. It feels productive. It isn't. Think of your brain like a city power grid at night. During the day, the main lines are running. Every tower lit up, every circuit handling incoming traffic. But late at night, when the city quiets down, a different set of lights comes on. Smaller, deeper, older. That's the default mode network. It activates specifically when you're not doing anything directed. When you're staring out a window, sitting without a task, letting your mind drift. Researchers have found it's the same network responsible for creativity, empathy, and self-reflection. The part of you that generates new ideas, understands other people's feelings, and makes sense of your own experience. It runs on that quieter grid. It can't switch on while the main power is blasting. We spent hundreds of thousands of years with that network getting regular use because silence was unavoidable. Then we built a device that fits in a pocket and eliminates silence almost completely. Every time you reach for the phone, the second your mind goes quiet, you're interrupting the one process your brain was actually designed to run in those moments. Every time you put it down and let the quiet sit, let the itch happen without scratching it, you're doing what the person in Blombo's cave was doing. The same thing that made the bead, made the flute, looked up at the stars and started asking why.